This is the debut episode of the Opposite of Infantry, and I am fortunate to have as our first guest, John Ham. Can you hear me, John?
Yeah, you're coming in great too. I think I can hear everything you're saying.
Awesome. We have been screwing around with this for some time, so we're going to go ahead and keep it going. Hopefully our technical issues do not, hinder us too much further. So pop on if you can't hear me, bud. But thank you so much for joining me today, for helping me along this episode 1 of this journey. You're one of the very first people that I actually brought this idea to and talked to you about this concept of opposite of infantry and what it means. So I just want to open it right up. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and what does this phrase, what does this idea of the opposite of infantry mean to you?
Yeah, so I guess I'll start with a little bit about myself. My background is I joined the Army Reserves in January of 2001. That's a junior in high school. I finished up my junior year of high school, went to basic training the summer of 2001. We were talking about this a little bit before. It kind of ties into the idea of the opposite of infantry. When I went to basic training, there was no wars going on. We weren't dealing with the war on terror or the threats that came with that at the time, right? Joining the Army Reserves, the active duty Army, didn't have the same type of, I think, meaning that they might have now. So when I
Absolutely.
was in basic training, oh, can you hear me?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I was in basic training, we had September 11th happen. Kind of changed the way that the active duty Army and the Army Reserves was understood at the time. I was a civil affairs specialist. I signed up to be a civil affairs specialist. Came back, finished my senior year of high school,
What was that like? What was
went
that like
to,
being a split option, like in that year between, after 9/11 happened? Because I joined not to, we're the same grade. I graduated in '02 as well. I joined in November of '01, just after. So for me, there
yeah.
already was a stigma because, by November of '01, we're a couple months in, we know, war is happening. I joined the reserve as an admin clerk. And that was like, for me, it was like, at least I'm doing
So,
something. Everyone else was like, I'm going to go kick indoors and we're going to kill terrorists. So you had a very unique, there's very few people, in the military that have the experience that you have of being a split option, and having to go back to school after 9/11. Tell us a little bit more about how your senior year was.
I think being from New York, we had a different opinion of what it meant. Maybe that service, because it was so close to home what happened. We were returning to some place that was devastated by that. My high school that I had went to wasn't that far from the World Trade Centers.
Oh,
I had actually started going to high school. I'd actually withdrawn from that high school in New York City the year before and started going to high school in upstate New York, closer to West Point at the time. But the high school that I was previously going to was in New York City in 16th Street and 6th Avenue, which about 20 blocks from the World Trade Centers at the time. So we had a pretty unique or intimate relationship with 9/11 because it was so close to home.
absolutely.
Because we had neighbors and relatives that were killed in 9/11, right?
Absolutely.
We all knew somebody that had died there in New York City.
Was there any
People we had
thoughts?
grown up
Was there any thoughts of trying to switch to active duty or switch your job? Was there any discussions of that, or
Yeah,
were
absolutely.
you
I did try to go active duty a couple of times. It wasn't that easy to switch over, but also as soon as I finished AIT, my reserve unit was mobilized to go to Iraq as well. So the timing was interesting. While I was in AIT, I tried to apply to go active duty, and they said I had to finish my AIT and come back and talk to a recruiter. And by that time, my reserve unit was mobilized, and
Mhm.
we had been uh, starting to prepare and go to someplace. It wasn't known that we were going to Iraq at the time,
Yeah,
um, because the Iraq War wasn't what it would become. There was a lot of the UN was doing its investigations into the weapons of mass destruction and being
absolutely.
denied the access, and so we were gearing up in Turkey and Kuwait,
So we're
and so we
talking
were
what? Are
just
you
doing.
you talking late '02 or early '03?
So this is the very end of '02. So I finished my advanced individual training around November of 2000. So we were actually doing our Christmas, either our Christmas ball assembly or Thanksgiving ball assembly or something like that, some type of party. And they're like, hey, this is also where we're giving you guys some advance notification that we are preparing for mobilization. So we finished up our December drills, and then we came back in January
Mhm.
um, with 30-day activation orders to um, start packing our units, start training up for future mobilization. So we stayed on repeated 30-day orders from January until we actually deployed in March of 2003.
Yeah. So that was actually our parallels are crazy because I deployed March of '03, but again, being true to the theme of opposite of infantry, I deployed to Kosovo while everything else in the world was going down you know in Iraq. It was launching off literally right at the same time, just as you were headed out that way. While Afghanistan was underway, I was in a medical unit and we went to Kosovo. So that was, again, very kind of a strange divergence, to just be in a complete different part of the world doing a completely different mission. So how was that your only deployment, or did you end up deploying several times while you were in the reserve?
So I came back from Iraq in 2004, March 2004, and tried to go to college for a little bit and didn't really take, and quickly applied to come onto recruiting duty
Hmm.
and got picked up for that, and been doing recruiting duty since January 2005.
Oh, wow. So you came into recruiting, about 4 or 5 years before I did. I came back, also did the college thing. Again, we have very similar parallels in that. I got back in, end of '03, but by mid '04, I was cross leveled and activated again. And this time I was off to Kuwait. It was technically part of the OIF campaign. A lot of people give me flack because I got my quote combat from Kuwait from that time period. And then I didn't make the jump to recruiting until '09. So you had been, well established by the time I came along. And then we both, obviously been in, recruiting command, you since '05, me since '09. So well, apart, the typical bureaucratic, kind of office jobs across the US. So both of us kind of have this, reserve background. Both of us have background when it comes to, being kind of admin, non-combat guys. I'm sure, you've heard a lot over your career, both in being in the reserve, both being reserve mobilized with active duty, and then also in recruit. So circling back to the theme and kind of the name of the show, like kind of reflecting, we just did a real short Cliff Note version of your career. So what does it come to mind when you hear the phrase the opposite of infantry? Like, what does that mean? And how does that apply to you in your career?
Well, I mean, I think of recruiting a lot. Recruiting ends up, to me, being pretty far away from infantry as you can possibly get.
Yeah. The
And
grid that we're
it,
using, so for the show, if you haven't seen the graphic, you can check it out on the website or on our social channels.
yeah, I had it up, but
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know what I did with
Yeah,
it.
yeah. Or for anyone listening, you can check it out. So the barometer of what we're using for opposite of infantry is violence and physical demands. So infantry is very high on both of those. Admin, recruiting, recruiting especially falls on the very low end. We don't have a lot of physical demands other than needing a passive fitness test. And obviously we don't, most of us, there's some cities out there that, that aren't great, but obviously it's not going to be anywhere comparison to what infantry
Yeah,
is doing.
yeah. I'll be as many times I've been a station commander. Whenever we get the fortunate infantry guys to come to a recruiting station, I haven't had too many saying that they want to go back to an infantry platoon um, after being in a recruiting station. You get the opportunity to avoid being cold and wet and miserable, to going home every day to your family. I know that's not everyone's experience.
Sure.
There's plenty of awful recruiting stations, and there's plenty of times where recruiting can be miserable.
Yeah.
Um, but you get to go home every night to your family. You're not out in the field. You're not going to NTC. You're not doing, you know,
Yeah.
crazy field exercises.
Right.
It doesn't happen in recruiting command.
Yeah.
It
Reflecting,
is,
I was to say, so
you know,
reflecting almost 20 years of recruiting service, I'm sure as you've noted,
20 years in January. Yep.
there you go. So, and you've encountered a lot of those combat guys, because a lot of people that come through army recruiting, for listeners who are not aware, they're not volunteers. A lot of them are just told like, hey, this is a career broadening assignment. So not a lot of folks are happy to be there, the least of which sometimes
Yeah.
are the combat guys. So in your nearly 20 years of experience, how has that dynamic played out? How have you been able to manage, from an administrative standpoint, a leadership standpoint, even from a social standpoint? Like, you've been intermixed for the last 20 years with, a lot of straight up, kicking indoors, shoot people in the face kind of combat guys that are now in hometown USA working for you. How has that dynamic played out, and how have you managed, what are some lessons learned that you've had to manage that dynamic of kind of being the opposite, but having to work with and manage, your opposite?
People are people. I mean, you gotta treat them as humans, and each person is gonna have their own needs and wants and desires. One of the things that kind of makes the army and, kind of recruiting too unique is that we can really look out for the people in our organization. From, if you're not in the military, then you're kind of looking at it from either a human resources or a managerial point of view. The people that are in your employ or working for you, you can really look out for them in a way that you can't in a civilian world. You're looking out for not just their work ethic or what you can get out of them, but you're looking out for their whole well-being. You're looking out not just for how hard they're working or what you can get out of them, but making sure that they're taking care of their family, or you're making sure they're continuing their education, preparing for when they retire, or whether they're going to get out of the military after this assignment, or for their when they get back to their combat arms job, if that's what they're going to do.
Mhm.
Because some people are going to want to go back to the combat arms job.
Sure.
Some people are going to stay in recruiting. So you're going to have to help them prepare to take on the next recruiting assignment.
Yeah. Have you ever had
So as
Have you ever had challenges and, people think you're too soft? People accuse you of being too easy on people, too laid back. Has that ever caused issues or, had those accusations thrown at you? I know I have. But what have your been some of your experiences that, coming from a
yeah,
completely
no
different
one's
background?
ever accused me of being Yeah, I don't think anyone's ever accused me of being too laid back or anything like that. I've had even though I was never infantry or combat arms, anything like that, being civil affairs kind of gives you a unique experience being a support MOS because civil affairs, um, when you deploy civil affairs, you deploy with all these guys. So
Mhm.
a lot of times we could share a lot of similar experiences. And that kind of gave me some credit in that regard. And then, I didn't let myself get too soft, right?
Yeah.
I was still able to maintain my physical fitness. I was still able to hang with those infantry guys, those artillery guys as much as I could.
Mhm.
I was always trying to prove myself by going to boards or, you know, getting that 270 on the PT test when
Mm.
I was a 270 on the PT test. Say, hey, look, I can still hang with you guys as much as I can without,
Sure. Do you feel that
looking too stupid.
Do you feel that having that, the combat patch from Iraq, do you think that helped with in terms of, the trash talk, the sibling rivalry, kind of the
Yeah, absolutely.
peer-to-peer respect compared to some of your peers like me who has a Kuwait patch? Obviously there's a lot, I've heard it all. That's not a deployment. It doesn't count. I mean, obviously it's a completely different experience.
Oh yeah. I mean, it also depends on, I've been doing this for a long time and I've seen it come in cycles too. It all depends on who you're working with. Everyone's going to be different.
Yeah.
Some people care, some people don't. Some people are going to be a little more emotionally intelligent than others, right?
Hmm.
Some people are going to be, understand that, hey, look, everyone's career is going to be different. Not everyone's going to have those
Yeah.
opportunities. But some people are going to say, hey, look, where were you? Who were you deployed with? Okay, yep, we deployed together.
Yeah.
You're cool.
Yeah.
Some people are like, you've never deployed to anywhere worth a damn. I'm just not gonna respect you bottom line. Some people are gonna be like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just the way it is. But you know, I have PTSD. This is a real thing that I deal with every day.
Hmm.
So I can relate a little bit better with people that have bad PTSD. That's something that I think, gives me a little bit of ability to just kind of say, "Hey, look, I know what you're dealing with today."
Hmm.
Every 2 weeks I'm sitting there with, either in group therapy or with my therapist,
Hmm.
talking about, what's bugging me this week. Um, I know what you're dealing with. I tried dealing with it by myself too long. Let's get you fixed. Um,
Absolutely. So it
you
sounds
know,
like
it's
your
yeah,
background, you're kind of in multiple places on that grid that we have, because obviously you've had,
yeah,
some experiences that someone like me have not had. You've had a very different, we have damn near identical timelines. We have almost, very similar career paths down to when we deployed, down to when where we're in training. Our whole careers mirrored each other very closely, but we had very different overall experiences, especially with your experience in Iraq versus me working in the top in, a hospital in Kosovo or a naval port in Kuwait, not having
yeah.
to deal with that. So obviously, where we're going to plot ourselves on that grid, even us, as close as can be in terms of parallels are drastically different of where we're going to plot our experiences. We can probably both agree on our USAREC, our army recruiting experience, but before that, pretty drastic differences. And that definitely helps
Yeah,
shape us.
yeah, I look at that grid there and, being civil affairs, I don't know how physically demanding civil affairs was. There were definitely some days where we were out all day, when we were deployed, we did 2 missions a day, sometimes 3 missions a day. Were they demanding? I don't know if they were demanding. Um, we were out there, assessing, work sites. We were out there at the different, you know, mayor cells or whatever. I did spend most of my deployment in Fallujah from 2003 to 2004, which was not great.
Yeah.
just wasn't a great place to be.
Sure.
So was it violent? Yeah, did deal with some violence,
Mhm.
but whenever, as often as we can go with a infantry team, or you know someone with a lot more gun experience than we had, we went out there. Like I said, I went straight from AIT to Iraq.
Mhm.
There was not a whole lot of extra training beyond that.
Yeah.
We there were times that we'd ride out with Bradleys if we could get it.
Yeah.
I mean, we were not people out there trying to, throw down with the Mujahideen out there in the desert. That wasn't my job.
Yeah.
We were there to, you know, win the hearts and minds,
Yeah.
and that's what we were trying to do. Spend the Iraqi money, the UN money, whoever's money,
Mhm.
to try to get these people living their lives.
So, interesting
Um,
point that you made there. You said, "Hey, that I wasn't throwing down. That wasn't my job." Right. So there's so many layers to service that that we don't even, I don't think, consciously think about. You're in Iraq in a war zone, in a violent area, clearly, being exposed, seeing things. And even you're like, oh, well, there's hardcore guys, they were the ones really doing it. And then there's me where I'm like, like my weapon was locked up. So even me to you, I would say, oh man, John had like way crazier experience. John deserves way more respect. John, is the one that really had to deal with stuff, you know, whereas if you have that same perspective of those combat guys above you. So there's just like,
yeah,
there's so many echelons, and I don't think there's anything necessarily inherently wrong with that. For me to hold you in a higher regard, and then you to hold, to have these kind of different echelons that we regard each other in. I think where it becomes a problem, which we'll circle back to later, is when we get into this toxic tribalism of when, as we'll dig into in a bit, of where does the line drawn of, having respect for each other, having respect for each other's experiences, putting different people on a pedestal. For example, a
yeah,
recruiter, one thing that that I've thrown out there, talked to a few people, a recruiter, an admin specialist in the reserve. We go to basic training, we learn about all these Medal of Honor winners. Like, we know, like, that's not for us. Like, that's not what we signed up. Like, is it possible that we get put in a situation? Sure. There are Medal of Honor winners who were, not necessarily combat guys, but that's not like the norm. Normally it's the people who are equipped. Like, there's people
yeah,
know, like, hey, I'm going to go out and get a V device. Like, that was never in the cards or the plan for me. And there's, again, nothing wrong with that. It's a different experience. Like, but that's just not there's not like loads of admin specialists or HR guys or recruiters out there being like, oh man, I'm totally going to get a V device or win a Medal of Honor someday. Like, we know, like, that's just not in the cards for us. Like, and that's okay. But again, there's this whole, you know, toxicity of that can extend past. And I'm not talking about
right,
like, oh, hurt feelings. Like, hey, we all got thick skin. We're all going to talk trash and, make fun of each other, in a sibling rivalry type of way. But when it starts crossing lines and devaluing people's service and dipping into, affecting mental health in a very serious way, talking about suicides, things like that. I think there is a line in the sand, so to speak,
yeah.
that I hope that
Well,
this show
yeah.
and
So
conversations like this
I
can
got
address.
yeah. Well, when I went to recruiter school, we all used to wear Bs at the time, and you talk about that toxicness, right?
Mhm,
When I came back from Iraq, I got awarded a V device for some of the missions that we went on,
mhm,
and when we were wearing Bs, I'm sitting there in recruiter school with all these guys, and they're like, "Oh, what did you get your V device for?" I just didn't want to talk about it.
mhm,
I was dealing with PTSD at the time and stuff,
yeah,
and I'm like, I don't know, I don't want to talk.
yeah,
And they're like, "Oh, you didn't earn it." I'm
of
like,
course.
"Okay."
Mhm,
And let me tell you, man, like they would get ruthless, man. Here I am. I was 20. I just turned 21, back from Iraq, And here these guys probably had done back-to-back tours to Iraq and Afghanistan, and they were badass infantry guys, I'm sure, um, and man, they just would cut me down, and just because I didn't want to talk about my experiences in Iraq, and they never made me feel so worthless, right, during those times. And I get what you're talking about there, and that's even you talk about even having those experiences, and I just never talked about that stuff. I didn't want to. I still don't talk about that stuff
Yeah.
really.
Yeah, and
You know,
that's
it,
and
it's
we respect your
it
journey, and it's unfortunate that that sort of tribalism and elitism exists. It's one thing for, I've grown thick skin in terms of, I have to kind of poke fun at myself, hence kind of the launch of this podcast. But I consider myself a little fortunate, like I actually had the opportunity when I was in Kuwait. They said, "Hey, we need volunteers to run gun trucks, convoy escort missions up and down Iraq." This is 04, 05 time frame. And I am a HR guy working in the talk, running spreadsheets, doing briefings, and I was in journalism in high school, always, always kind of a nerd, still am a little bit. So it was one of those, like, I'm good at this. I am contributing to the military in a way that is good. And I didn't volunteer for gun trucks. A lot of other guys did. They jumped at the opportunity. They're like,
yeah,
hell yeah, we're gonna go, blow some shit up and go, go kick in some doors and fight the fight. I stayed behind and finished my associate's degree in my free time using the computers and the MWR, computers and all that. So, and there are some people that are like, hey, you like that's automatic cowardice, because I didn't do that. I had the opportunity and I passed it up. And sometimes it's, I've thought like, oh, should I have but it's just, like, I probably would have gotten somebody else killed or myself killed because if put in that situation, obviously I raised my
right. You
right
never know.
hand. I'm willing to do it. But, just that whole perception of, because I didn't put myself in that situation willingly, there was a lot of people that are like, "Oh, well, you're young, you should be doing that. This is a once in a lifetime, you should be fighting the fight, do something real for your country." And I did something different for my country. I did something drastically different for my country. And and I'm at peace with that. And I've learned to poke fun of it, and I've learned to just accept, like, but at the same time, people say, "Oh, well, thank you for your service." I'm like, what do you think?" Like I lived, but again, talk to my wife. Like, I lived in a tent, a big tent with, 6 or 7 other dudes for a year. It was an air conditioned tent. So it was luxury, by military standards. But from like a civilian perspective, my wife thinks I'm like
Yep,
insane for saying like, "Oh, you
yep.
lived in a tent on like a wooden cot that you built," like that. And you think that that's not like out of the ordinary. And I'm like, well, compared to other people, like, I might as well have been in a 5-star hotel. But compared to
No, yeah,
compared
yep.
to, a combat guy, or compared to what you went through, it's just so weird. But, when you kind of take it all away and compare it to civilians, we all did something, but we all have these, like, imposter syndrome to deal with. We all have our own kind of
Absolutely.
our own journeys and our things to deal with. And, again, it's fun to, for me, obviously you have a different set of experiences, but I've gotten to the point where I can just kind of look back at the silliness of it all, and that's something that I kind of want to segue through. We don't want to be all serious. So let's switch gears a little bit and let's talk about the ridiculousness of bureaucracy. So let's dive into your opposite of infantry life for the last 20 years in recruiting. So do you have any like movies or shows that you're a big fan of that kind of have like ridiculous bureaucracy or office environments
Like
or
my
scenes?
comfort shows?
Yeah, yeah. Or movies. Do you have anything that kind of has like kind of similarities or anecdotes of what you've experienced in real life from, just insane office life or bureaucratic perspective?
Always love The Office, right? I
There
mean,
you go.
who doesn't?
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, I gotta say though, the one that I think was the surprise to me was Space Force. Definitely rang true more than anything.
Oh, really? Some
Nothing,
examples or
nothing.
scenes that really stuck out that was like, "Oh
Let
my
me tell you,
god,
when you
that's
talk about
real."
crazy bureaucracy, yeah, the craziness of bureaucracy holding up the wheels of progress. I mean, that's. I mean, I felt that every time.
Like, in your bones.
Yeah, man.
So what are some examples from the show that really, like, stood out? Any specific scenes or episodes that were, like, just right in the gut? Like, "Oh my goodness,
Uh,
this is real
I
life."
can't recall any of. Yeah, I can't recall any off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Maybe when like the computer systems had to update,
Mhm.
and then it just reminded me of when like all of our computers went down in recurring command for like a month or
Yeah,
something like that. I'm sure you remember
I
that.
do.
But we couldn't do like anything, and then we still were required to figure it out because it's just the way it is, man.
Yeah,
The computers weren't working, the internet was down, but we still had to figure it out. Put people in the army,
yeah,
and it's we. I don't know, man. I was watching that Space Force show, and it's just so many things. I'm like, man, they really got the bureaucracy of the military and the way the civilians interact with the military staff and everything, like down.
oh, yeah.
It
We've
just
an example that I would say an example both of us have dealt with is the evolution of, like, marketing and social media and how we've incorporated that. We've been around to see kind of, like, the rise and evolution. And, we've we've talked about this, we've both been a part of some of the big programs that have helped launch it. And man, is it ever, like pulling teeth, like convincing people who have, I mean, ostensibly no recruiting background, no marketing background, but the way the military works, they rotate folks in from a wide variety of backgrounds to lead, and we have to convince people that, hey, this is a good idea. And they're like, no,
yep.
no, it's not. We're not going to do that.
That's it's the way it is. I don't know. I really that show. I'm like, man, that show gets it.
Yeah. So what about, you said The Office is one of your favorites. Is there any like scenes or
Yeah, I
friendships or
mean,
dynamics that you've kind of like related to
the
real world?
friendships. I mean, in recruiting. Yeah, in recruiting, you definitely get those friendships. Yeah, you feel like you are there in that Groundhog Day every day, trying to just make it through. And I don't know if you had this experience, but I was just in the bullpen in recruiting, doing the phone calls
Mhm.
for like 5 years, um, and I liked it. I didn't have any problems with it, but man, it gets boring, and you got to do things just to keep yourself entertained. And the shenanigans that you get into sometimes, it's
Yeah. So
uh,
I'll be
you know,
honest, I miss some of the old pranks. Nowadays they'd say it's hazing.
no,
I
you broke up there for a second. Sorry.
I would say I miss the old shenanigans. Some of the stuff that modern now we would say is hazing, but the old things that we used to do to each other when you got your first contract, all the office pranks that surrounded that kind of rite of
Yeah,
passage.
I'll never say all the stuff that we used to. I'll never say out loud all the stuff that we used to do, but we definitely had a good time in the old days. But
Oh, yeah.
um,
I mean, even some of the milder stuff that you'd see in The Office, the show, like where we, fill each other's drawers full of random stuff. I remember one person that everyone came in early and like covered someone's gov completely in Post-it notes.
definitely done that a couple
Yep.
times. Yep.
So again, and that's some of the milder ones. We can talk off camera about some of the other stuff that we did that were
Nope. Never gonna talk about it. Taking it to the grave.
take
Yep.
it to the grave. Yeah, and again, in a mild one I'll talk about, there was an office I was in where it was a tradition where we had like one of those mega bottles of hot sauce. It was like a billion Scoville rating, one of those like ridiculous ones. So the concept of the kind of rite of passage, you had to like put a drop on your finger and put it right on your tongue, and that was like, and it was fun. We had fun. And then kind of like it shifted over the years. People stopped doing it. They didn't want to do it. They said it was hazing. I had fun with it. We also had people that would take it and they would put it on a napkin and like buff it into the outer edge of a coffee cup. So you'd go to sip your coffee and immediately it would like get onto your lip in your coffee.
No.
So, and again, stupid little stuff. That's minor things, but
Yeah.
it was like shining boots. People would come in early to
Yeah.
like
Right.
buff hot sauce into each other's coffee cups. Like, they're just mundane, random stuff, like you said, to get through the Groundhog Day to mess with each other.
Yeah. That's what it was. Yep.
Yeah. But it's
I mean, back when we started recruiting, I mean, you worked, I don't know, 8 o'clock in the morning to 8 o'clock at night. I mean, those are long days.
definitely has changed. So you've made a name for yourself over these last 20 years. You kind of the de facto leader. There's a AGR Facebook group for the reserve recruiters that you've kind of ascended to be, the leader and almost kind of like, cheerleader, mentor for this
Yeah,
entire
more,
niche
more like
community.
yeah, a cheerleader, perhaps not a leader. I don't know.
Well, like,
Cheerleader. I like cheerleader more than
yeah.
anything. Yeah.
You've generated a lot of respect. You've generated a lot of influence to the point to where generals, command teams, sergeant majors at all levels, at the highest levels of USAREC, you've kind of become a go-to guy. You were a talent manager for Army Reserve recruiters. So you got a behind the scenes curtain, behind the curtain look about, the real bureaucracy, the way up stuff of how we get moved around and assigned. But again, from town hall support to getting information to kind of rallying the troops
I'm
within
very,
our new niche community.
very loud. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm very loud. Yeah.
So talk to us.
That's why I like the
How
cheerleader
did you
thing.
get to be that guy? Because within the Army Reserve
Sure.
recruiting community, like you're the man. Like you're the one that ever, from the new recruiter that wants to learn that joins the Facebook group to
Yep.
the commanding general and the
Yeah.
deputy generals, like you're the guy that everyone goes to.
So yeah, it comes. All that comes from just wanting change to happen and being loud. So I had the opportunity to go to Fort Knox in 2017, 2018.
Mhm.
I was originally selected to be a instructor there. But at that same time, the talent manager who had been the talent manager for 10 years or something like that,
Mhm.
Sergeant Russo, some people will
Hey,
remember him.
you brought me into recruiting.
Yeah, sure, yeah, yeah, he did. He hired me too,
Yeah.
but he was retiring, and he's like, "Hey, it just so happens I'm retiring. How about you come to headquarters instead of going to the schoolhouse?" And I said, sounds like a great opportunity to me." So I took the opportunity, and one of the things that I saw was that there was a lot of information up at headquarters that was just not getting down to our team or else. And there was a Facebook group that Sergeant First Class Turner,
Mhm.
who is now
Oh
retired.
yeah, love her,
Um,
legend.
but yep, legend. Yep, everyone loves her. Now retired though. She still runs the Facebook group. I just help her out.
Mhm.
Um, but she had started this Facebook group for only AGR soldiers and recruiting command. And I said, "Hey, how about I help you admin it
Mhm.
and I will start posting stuff as I find it out from headquarters recruiting command." And she said, "Okay." So I would get the okay from the G1 team. I said, I'm going to post this information. And they were okay with that because I was already going TDY across the country sharing this information.
Mhm.
And I'm like, "Hey, I'm just going to start sharing on Facebook as well." And they were like, "Yeah, that's great." And then I started doing my own little, I wouldn't say town halls, but I would do my briefs that I was doing to the different battalions and brigade trainings. I would start doing them on Teams as well. Not Teams, but on Facebook
Mhm.
before we. And so I started doing that. And I would do it as often as I could. I think we started doing it once a quarter or twice a year or
Mhm.
something like that.
So you're almost breaking
Uh,
bureaucracy. So you took the bureaucracy straight to the people. You've kind of chopped out all the layers and says, "Hey, I'm just gonna, take all this stuff that's sitting up here at the head shed and kind of
yeah,
be the mass distributor, the inside guy for this niche group."
Yeah, so I wanted to put together a because there used to be an AGR handbook, and I wanted to put together a handbook, and information was changing so rapidly at the time. There were a lot of big changes happening, things moving to HRC, IPSE was coming on. They're like, no, we don't want to do a handbook.
Mhm.
I'm like, well, if we're not doing a handbook, can I just share the information that we have as it comes out
Mhm.
on Facebook? And they said, yeah, sure. You're sharing already, going TDY all the time. You can share your same stuff there.
Mhm.
So I was doing that. And then I'll be like, you know what? I think people are going to start getting bored with the information that I'm sharing just from G1. So then I would find other people to share information from. So I would go over to retention. I would go over to proponent that would do, the briefs on how to get promoted.
Mhm.
I would go over to G3 training, like what you need to do to get trained up, and just find guest speakers to do different presentations. So then I would do that. So I did that for a while, and then comes time for me to PCS.
Mhm.
So I PCS down to Raleigh, North Carolina to be a guidance counselor.
Yeah.
And what really kind of happens is, I am selfish and I need to make sure that I am looking good, right? And that's not totally true, but it makes for a good story.
Sure.
I'm like, man, I need to do some other things to make myself look good as a guidance counselor.
Yeah, yeah,
No one else is doing these briefs anymore.
yeah.
No one's doing the briefs.
So you left
So
and kind of everything
I don't
stopped.
remember. Everything stopped when I left. Yeah. So, and I don't remember exactly how it happened. I might have just emailed General Vereen. It might have just happened that
You
way.
just shot an email to the
Um,
commanding general. "Hey, sir."
no, different General Vereen, the Brigadier General,
Oh, okay.
Brigadier General Davis. Yeah, my Brigadier General
Yeah,
Davis.
yeah,
I might have sent an email straight to Brigadier General
yeah,
Davis, the DCG at the time.
yeah.
I might have, hey, this is what I used to do. I would love to continue doing this. And I was also doing a lot of videos online for Master Recruiter Badge stuff.
Yeah.
Like quarterly videos for the Master Recruiter Badge, maybe monthly videos for Master Recruiter Badge.
Mhm,
Like, hey, this is what I'm doing. Do you be interested in doing this as well?
mhm.
And I sent her a couple different ideas.
Sure, sure.
But the one that she really liked was the town halls and the weekly updates that we get out, once every month or so.
Or
We try
that's
to
about
get
right for
the
the military.
huh?
Weekly updates once a month? That's about
Yeah,
right for the
yeah,
military.
the weekly updates that we get out once a month. Yeah. So I was working with her to get her the information to put out the weekly updates, which would sometimes get put out, which was great. We highlight who are doing great things across the command.
Mhm.
And I was really trying to work with the brigade training shops and brigade operations to get them to reach out to the battalion operations to get me good news
So
stories
mind
from
you so for the listeners
reserve soldiers. But yeah,
yeah, so mind you, this is as
they
an
weren't really.
additional duty. This isn't your regular job. You're doing this on the side at this point.
Yeah, I'm doing all this on the side, right? So I'm a station commander now. At this point, I have now transitioned from being a guidance counselor again
Mhm.
to being a station commander. So I just left Raleigh, a guidance counselor shop, and now I'm a station commander again down the street, still in Raleigh.
Yeah.
So now I'm like emailing everybody. I'm like, hey, help me out here. I'm trying to highlight good news stories for AGR soldiers.
Mhm.
And I know everybody still because I just, for whatever reason, I made it my point just to know everybody. And I know how to find out everybody. So if I need to know who all the operations NCOs are for different brigades or battalions, I know how to look up that
Sure,
information.
sure.
It's not that hard. It just takes extra work.
Yeah. And that's just kind of
So like
rolled
when I
that
go,
just kept rolling for years. Because I mean, recently, I know General Hawkins still reaches out to you. You still got your
yeah,
ties to like, you're still the guy all these years later. So what you've started and kind of how you've, positioned
yeah.
yourself
So
as the guy
it
is awesome.
it becomes a thing that is really easy to maintain
Mhm.
because I've already done all the legwork for it.
Absolutely.
So everyone just says, "Hey, look, call Sergeant Hand if you want to keep doing this," and everyone likes to keep doing it. They just
Yeah.
call Sergeant Hand.
So
And whenever anyone says, "Hey, I want to help you out with this," I get so excited. I'm like, "Yeah, please.
yeah,
I'm going to retire someday.
yeah.
Please,
You
take
almost
it from
you
me.
you
They
almost
see all the
did.
work that I do. And I'm like, I don't
We
do that.
we take a minute to talk about that?
I almost
You
retired.
started
I almost
your
retired this
transition
year. Yeah.
classes. Let's touch on that just real quick. I think it's a great, again, very prototypical military of how this works. So you
Yep.
started transitioning, right? You started doing your classes?
Yeah, I started transitioning in 2023. I was doing all my retirement transition classes in 2023. Yep.
Yeah. And then what, week 1, literally what, the first week that you start doing your classes, if I remember
Yep.
correctly, right? What happens?
Yeah, then the most qualified list comes out and I'm right there at the top and I gotta
Congratulations.
make yeah, I gotta make that decision, right? So
How'd your wife take that
besides that,
when you'd already made a family decision to retire and then you make the promotion list just as you start the process?
next topic. Let's not
Okay, we'll skip that.
right
8
there.
by 10s.
Let's
How did those come about? Tell for those, again, a lot of our listeners might not know. So you do these signed 8 by 10s, and it's actually kind of been a collector's item in recruiting command. So how did the signed Sergeant Hand 8 by 10s come about? And how many of those actually are out there floating around?
started about 10 years ago,
Whoa.
maybe longer than that. So I used to do a lot of boards,
Mhm.
and it started off when I would, as a joke, it started
Of
off
course.
because I went to a board and I just had too many DA photos.
Yeah.
And actually, it actually started before that. It became a board thing, but it was one of those things that we did in the recruiting station, right?
Mhm.
Take one step back. So whenever we'd have a change of command or new sergeant major, we'd take the picture down,
Mhm.
and then I would always sign it, you know,
Mhm.
to whichever recruiter, love General so and so. I'd leave it on their desk, and they, the first couple of times they'd be very confused why they get a signed letter from a general on their desk. And then I went to a board one time, and for whatever reason, I just had way too many DA photos. And so I just signed one of them and gave it to one of the first sergeants
Yeah.
that was on the board that I was just friendly with,
Yeah, yeah.
as a joke. And he gave it to the president of the board, the sergeant major,
That's awesome.
and it was just a joke
Yeah.
during the board. And then I just started emailing them out to everybody. And whenever I talk to anybody now, I just send them one. It's just I don't know. It's just
It's one of your trademarks
people
now.
expect. Yeah, people just expect a
Yeah.
signed sergeant hand.
That AGR Facebook
Um,
group, people love posting their pictures, their signed 8 by 10 of Sergeant Hand. Like, I got one.
yep, yeah, it's just a thing now.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Whenever I get a new picture, I have to get them all sent out.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're running high on time. So I want to kind of to draw it back, circle back from the beginning. We've had some fun stories, talked about some real issues, but I really want to kind of wrap up and set the stage even for future episodes. And I want to circle back to toxic tribalism. We've seen it in politics right now. It's a hot button where, this guy isn't as hardcore, this guy's service isn't legit, or this guy is more military than this other guy. Um, and unfortunately, I think that, that ties into a lot of the stuff we've talked about, ties into mental health, ties into imposter syndrome, ties into elitism, like where, there's got to be a line between, friendly trash talk, or, can't use the word hazing anymore, whatever, or, our camaraderie, where we're just poking fun at each other to, being detrimental to the veteran community, being detrimental to mental health and contributing to a lot of the ills of society. And again, ultimately, that's what I hope we can kind of would bring out with future episodes. And I'd love to have you on as a co-host on future episodes if you'd be interested to have the
Absolutely, yeah.
opportunity.
Look,
But I want to throw that to you. What's your take on toxic tribalism? What have you seen, and kind of what are your thoughts based on your experiences, what you've dealt with? Where is that line, and what can we do as service members and veterans in this community to combat this?
So my experience now is, I told you, I dealt with a lot early in my career. Now, after 20 years of therapy and having that now better educated perspective on it, I can say that and be comfortable when people try to have that toxic perspective that you're calling it, or toxic tribalism. It's never directed at me, even if they're trying to force on me. It's always something directed inward on them. Um, right? It's never something that I think that they're trying to, it's not my problem.
Mhm.
It's something that they have something internal to them that they're trying to deal with, that they can't understand, that some type of self-loathing, some type of thing that they're trying to deal with. When you talk about the politics stuff, I mean, that's sensationalism. That's people trying to sell a story. But when we talk about it, when we're at work or when we're at the VFW or the bar or something like that, I've seen it all. Um, and I used to really let it bother me. Uh, and it really did bother me. And I dealt with it in a number of different ways that weren't healthy. Now I can look at that it's not directed at me when people deal with that stuff. They're trying to either make themselves bigger than they were, or justify what they did to themselves, or um, give themselves some type of delusion of grandeur or something. Um, it never has anything to do with me.
Yep.
It wasn't always like
What advice can you give to folks that might be, struggling with
what good advice
experiencing it?
can I give them?
Yeah, what advice can you give people that might be, having trouble dealing with this toxic tribalism, whether being attacked or just hearing it, the chatter online, or having your service degraded, or just these, really terrible, running down veterans attacking veterans, civilians
And
attacking veterans. How can you
yeah,
you've had a lot of healing, you've had a lot of experience. What advice can you give to people that might be having some mental health issues and dealing with toxic tribalism in our current hyper
it,
politicized environment?
it it's easy for me to say just to remove yourself from this situation, right? That's
Mm.
the easiest thing to do, but you can't always do that. The best thing to do is try to get yourself into some type of counseling or therapy. Vet center was the best place for me. If you're a vet that has been to like Iraq or Afghanistan, the vet center is going to take you in a second.
Mhm.
But counseling is, I don't know, it helped me out a lot. Um, it's just trying to understand. Once you understand yourself and your own self worth, that's the number one thing. Once you understand your own self worth, no one else can touch it.
Uh,
That's the hardest thing.
Yeah.
And
What do you think?
the only way I could do that was to
Sorry, go ahead.
the only way I could really get to that stage was through therapy.
What do you think we can do as a military and veteran community? Obviously the answer isn't just to argue on the internet. What can we do to try to combat and minimize this idea of toxic tribalism, and this it lead to, dangerous elitism? What, as a community,
No,
how can we come together to say, no, this is not acceptable, and not get sucked into that vortex?
yeah, unfortunately, I think we're doing everything we can to say it's not acceptable. I think we know that it's not acceptable. Unfortunately, we're at a very volatile stage in history
Mm.
where people feel like they have to be angry about something for whatever reason, and we could talk about whatever reason all day long. This is, I don't think, the venue for that.
Yeah.
But, people feel like they have to be angry right now, and they're gonna find reasons to be angry.
Mhm.
You know,
I think
a lot of times, if you find yourself being that reason, I- I've heard it said, and I say it, someone is always looking for a villain, and sometimes you will be that villain. If you're someone's villain for no reason that you can figure out, try to remove yourself from that situation and don't try to understand it. Just get out of there. If you can't justify your own self-worth, then you need to figure out a way to do that.
absolutely.
It's hard.
Yeah. And I think,
But
one recommendation that I would give, and hopefully a theme we can keep bringing up, is hopefully the value of the veteran tribe and the service member tribe. I would hope that that can outweigh some of the other tribalisms that are out there, whether it be political or social, hopefully that the commonality that we all have as veterans can overcome and supersede some of
Yep,
the other, petty tribalistic stuff causes us to fight against each other, because I mean, regardless of, when we're serving together, it doesn't matter where you come from, what your social background is, what your religious background is, what your political background is, we're all working arm in arm, side by side to make the mission happen. And I'm not
yeah,
sure if people just that if we lose that, or, that feeling kind of fades, but I think the more we can kind of draw upon that level of camaraderie and support, hey, we all served in different ways, whether it's guard, reserve, active, combat, non-combat, in the end, we all raised our right hand, to serve a bigger purpose together. And then hopefully
absolutely.
that can be an overriding commonality that can
Yeah,
lead.
I mean, it's
But I want to open it up. Any final thoughts, final comments? I'm grateful to have you on. I am appreciative that you shared some stories, shared some laughs, and, kind of opened up this conversation, which I hope will be, a long running show, this opposite of infantry concept. But I want to open it up to you. If you want to plug your social medias, where people can find you. And again, any closing thoughts on our conversation today?
yeah, no, I think this is a great topic. I think it's important to remember that it is, everybody is in the part of the military. We need it all. You know, to Got questions for me, you can look me up on all the social medias at the j.hand, pretty much everything, to Instagram, Facebook at the.j.hand. So, um, but yeah, it's if anyone's ever trying to bash your career or your importance in this whole military thing experience, it ain't you, man. It's them.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, John. I really enjoyed chopping it up with you and really setting a great foundation for the future of this. I'm sure you'll be back. I look forward to having you on again with some other guests. Again, this is the Opposite of Infantry at Opposite of Infantry. We're LinkedIn, Instagram, oppositeofinfantry.com, and we're going to be distributed on YouTube and anywhere you find your podcasts. Thank you very much. And we'll see you next episode.